Nō reira ki te mihi atu ki o koutou katoa i roto te kaupapa o te rā. Nau mai hara mai ki roto o te māro o te parapara. Nau mai whakatau mai e mihi ana ki a koe ana, tō karikia, tō mihi e tēnei wā. E mihi ana ki tō tātou kīngi a tūheitia. Me te whare kaihui ariki e mihi ana ki tō tātou aua a Waikato, te tupuna aua. Ngā tupuna o Ngāti Wairere, ngā hapu o Waikato, moi mai rā koutou. Nō reira tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I'm really pleased to be here this afternoon to talk about the origins and the whakapapa of the name Kirikiriroa. And when we think about what does the name actually mean, kirikiri refers to the alluvial soils along the banks of the Waikato River. Those soils weren't exactly fertile, but if you have a look over here at the mounds inside the Kumara enclosure, they are reconstructions based on an archaeological survey that was done in 2000 at our direction with Dr. Tom Hyam, who is now a professor of archaeology at Oxford University, and at the time was heading the carbon dating lab at Waikato University, and Warren Gumley, who's about to graduate with a PhD in archaeology and the study of gardening soils here in Waikato. In fact, gave Warren his start in that area of research when we became involved with the Fonterra expansion, and behind Fonterra is a very large parsite called Mangaharakiki. So as part of the application to Heritage New Zealand, or then Historic Places Trust, they needed an authority to do survey excavation, and much to our delight had uncovered the remnants of the cultivation grounds. In 2000, when the Hamilton City Council applied to extend Wairere Drive from River Road to Hukanui Road, right on the corner there you'll see a number of borrow pits, well at least 2 or 3 of them, but one very large one. So as part of the compromise, we insisted on an archaeological survey of that site, and Warren Gumley and Dr. Hyam did that assessment and found in situ the patterns of the mounds. The actual base of the mounds themselves were packed down with clay and sand, which provided a very solid base for the kumara to develop into the tuber itself. That helped springboard this garden into existence, and having that degree of research behind it, and as well as some of the artifacts that I had me managing to locate both here and overseas, brought into being this garden. They were related back to the tradition of gardening here, going back, if anything, to go by the soils, lake samples from Lake Rotorua, the Hamilton Lake, to indicate that there were Polynesian activity, ancient Polynesian Māori activity here at least 800 years. So, who were the first people? Hidden behind, I'm going to talk to the garden staff, there are 5, I think there are about 5 pou. Taunga ki te marangai, moko hape, ngaiwi, matakore, were recorded in our earliest traditions as the first people who cultivated here. That's also evident in some of the place names that I've been releasing on the Hamilton Community Notice Board Facebook page. I've been giving explanations behind the name of Tirapa, Putikitiki, the ridgeline where the University in Hillcrest is now. But also there are names of cultivation grounds that are known in our traditions. At each of those cultivation grounds, you can see probably a good example of one at the St Andrews Golf Course. you'll see the hollows and depressions there in the golf course. That was called Te Awatamatea. So this area was highly favoured for the growing of marakai. Not so much the fertility of the soil, but because of the because of the unique soil lens along the banks of the river itself. Kirikiri is the gravel. So what you see here is the term that refers to kirikiri. Roa refers to the long stretch. In 1838, a missionary, Reverend Taylor, recorded, I think, or was it Taylor or not, from Ngārua here, 14 miles up the Waikato River. How long is 14 miles at today's kilometres? Could anyone answer that? I'm kind of still stuck in the old...
I think about 20.
20 kilometres? Really? Yeah, well, that's what they recorded, is a near unbroken line of cultivations of both sides of the river, from Ngārua here, 20 kilometres up. So that gives you an indication in the 1830s how productive the cultivations were here. Part of the explosion of that possibly would have been the introduction of the riwai, the potato. Our accounts record that they came from the Hauraki area, aboard a waka kehua. You tend to think that could have been the Endeavour. So that probably also explains the intertribal war we used to often have with Hauraki, towards at the back of Tauhei, Hoi Tainui, in that general area there, along the Piako River. So the introduction of the potato more than likely came from that direction, from when Cook and Joseph Banks arrived in 1769, and them introducing the riwai Māori there. Interestingly, some of the old varieties of the names of the kumara began to become extinct, and the names of the potatoes that were introduced, the names were given to those. Now, we haven't grown the riwai Māori here because there's no whakapapa to it. My late uncle, Honoti Apati, he lived at Aotea. We had this discussion amongst the kaumātua at the time, John Haunui, Te Waia Mauri Oho. These are mainly Te Ariki Nui's elders. This karaua gave the answer that I could never fault, that the kumara has a whakapapa, but not the potato, not the riwai Pākehā. Makes sense actually, because it was introduced by Joseph Banks, by the Endeavour, the crew of the Endeavour. So hence why you see in Māori tradition there's a lot of references to the kumara, and it has its own whakapapa. Because we classified, scientists today classify things into subgroupings according to their genetic term. We classify by whakapapa from origins of the deities themselves. The kaitiaki for the kumara for the Tainui waka was puna, whakatupukai, which is one of the stone that mark the final burying resting place of the Tainui canoe. She was the female element of the Māori of the kumara, and also my grandmother and many of the women were the ones who planted the kumara, and that's a unique tikanga to Waikato, to the Waikato people. There was always the woman who planted the kumara, while the men prepared the marakai, the cultivation ground. So, in terms of the origins of the name Kirikiriroa, the old pa was located between London Street and Bryce Street in the CBD. There's a ngāwha, a thermal spring that's there, which led to the university looking at other fault lines of the city when I started to explain where those old ngāwha or thermal springs were. So with that particular spring there, when you have a feature that's not common, there's something about when the old people talk about that mauri, that life force. So how much time have I got? I must be getting close to 10. I don't want to go too long because other speakers need to speak. So that is just in the basic snapshot of the kumara. We have here the taro, Māori, which is reputed to have come on the origins of it came on board the Tainui Waka, and that was koha to me by Honoti, my late uncle Honoti Apati. He was the kaitiaki of the taro that grows at Aotearoa. I've since been able to, I'd love to do a DNA research project on that to trace the actual strain of that taro. One academic said, oh, there's no taro Māori surviving because they don't flower. Well, I've seen people flower that one. So that you will say haere to that comment. So interesting, the Manuka harbour is also known as Te Manuka or Hoturoa, the taro of Hoturoa. So there are comparative names that we can trace back to Polynesia. And I want to just finally finish on the name Kirikiriroa. Its whakapapa can be traced back to the Tuamotus and the Tuamotu Islands in Tahiti there. I just made contact with an elder from the Tuamotus who heard my talk on Radio New Zealand about the name Kirikiriroa, and he reached out to me and he said that his village chanted a particular chant that refers to Kirikiriroa and how they use that to celebrate the fertility of soil. So that's my 10-minute blah blah. But I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and just feel free to ask me questions about the parapara. And, and after all the speakers, Lō reira tēnā koutou katoa.